Welcome to Love Lies Chronicles.
I'd really appreciate your comment. It helps me understand if you enjoyed the story and how I can improve in future ones. My name is Grant Keller. I'm 38 years old, a mechanical engineer in Austin, Texas. Tuesday nights are usually the easiest part of my week. Light traffic on Mopac, a podcast on the drive home, leftovers reheated, a quiet half hour while the AC fights the late heat. I like things simple. Projects have schematics, timelines, tolerances. I've built my life so the rest of it feels the same, predictable and sturdy enough to lean on. I stepped inside, dropped my keys into the ceramic dish by the door, and felt the house press back in a way it hadn't before. Not loud, just tight, as if the air had been pulled a notch too far. She was at the dining table, not slouched in her usual end-of-day posture, but upright. I set my bag on the usual chair and let the little sounds of the house take inventory. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the wall clock, the AC kicking on, the soft click of the return vent. Nothing dramatic. Still, I knew. A person doesn't write a grocery list like that. They don't sit like that unless they've practiced it. She looked up long enough to meet my eyes, and then back down, as if eye contact might disturb whatever balance she'd built. There was no storm in her expression. It was the practiced calm of someone who had rehearsed an outcome and now wanted to get through it without improvisation. I've been in enough design reviews to recognize the look. The decision is made. This meeting is a formality. "Can you sit down?" she asked. I pulled out the chair across from her and leaned back, not far enough to look defensive. I kept my hands open on the table. She expected something from me. Questions, apologies, a jumpstart to her speech. The stack of pages under her fingers made that clear. The more I noticed, the calmer I felt. If this was a presentation, I wasn't going to be a participant. I'd be the quiet guy in the back of the room who lets the projector hum while the slides move themselves. The papers weren't what surprised me. The last few months had been a careful pattern of small revisions, new passcodes on her phone, a calendar that filled without my seeing the invites, late returns that came with tidy explanations, and a tone that made follow-up feel like interrogation. She started using phrases that didn't sound like her, needing to live more intentionally, finding space, reclaiming my identity. On their own, any one of those could be nothing. Together, they were an agenda. I noticed other adjustments too. She began sleeping closer to the edge of the bed, just enough to make the gap a fact. On weekend mornings, she let the coffee go cold and moved through the house like she was trying to keep busy without actually starting anything. Small, precise changes. A good engineer learns to respect the force of accumulations. You don't need a catastrophic failure to know a system is out of tolerance. Sometimes the deviations whisper. I kept my gaze steady and let silence do the work. Silence in a lab is a kind of instrument. It exposes which components vibrate under pressure. Her thumb drifted to the top corner of the first page, then settled. The corner was bent already from being practiced, flipped, reconsidered. She had likely said these lines to a mirror, maybe to a friend over speakerphone. There is a rhythm people adopt when they study a set of sentences for the moment they'll be required. I could hear it before the words arrived. What does a man do with that knowledge? Years ago, I might have tried to interrupt the slide deck. Ask her when all this started, offer to fix whatever could still be fixed, bargain for a pause button so we could talk it through. I've learned that talking feels productive when both people are aiming at the same map. When they aren't, it's just a way to give time a job. I thought about our ordinary Tuesdays from the last few years. The days when we would both come home with different kinds of tired on us. Hers from unpredictable people, mine from predictable problems. I'd run water over the pan I used too long. She'd roll her eyes at me leaving boots by the door, and we'd settle into something that was at least familiar. It wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. But at some point, familiar turned into a case against the life itself, and she started collecting exhibits. The neatness of the notes said more than any sentence written on them. She didn't want the risk of live conversation. She wanted control. Control lives in scripts. I'm not assigning malice. People choose the tools they trust. I took in the room like it might be the last time I saw it under our joint custody. The ring from a water glass she'd forgotten to wipe. A scuff on the baseboard I kept meaning to repaint. The light fixture we picked on a Sunday we didn't argue. None of it made me sentimental. If anything, it steadied me. Objects don't take sides. They just sit where you leave them until someone decides to move them. She cleared her throat again. You can tell a lot by the second throat clear. The first is nerves. The second is choreography. She was waiting for me to open a door so she could walk through it on her terms. I've watched grown men ruin good negotiations by filling air that didn't need filling. The thing about silence is it makes people choose between truth and momentum. Momentum usually wins. I suspected that's what would happen here. The strangest part was noticing I wasn't bracing for pain. The earlier dread had already finished its job and left the room. I felt the way I do when a test rig finishes its run and the data is what it is: clean, legible, unarguable. Whatever was on those pages wasn't going to surprise me, because I understood the design. I thought briefly about calling a friend later, rehearsing my own story out loud, trying on a few lines until they fit. Then I imagined the quiet of my truck with the engine ticking as it cooled and realized I wouldn't need to talk. Clarity doesn't require an audience. It only requires a decision. I could have said her name. I could have told her I was ready to hear whatever she'd worked so hard to put together. Instead, I watched her eyes settle, watched the breath she gathered to launch the first paragraph, and understood something simple. A speech needs friction to catch fire. Without it, it's just kindling laid out in careful rows. The clock ticked. The AC cycled. Somewhere down the block a dog barked at nothing and gave up. I let the room hold steady, and inside that steadiness, a new kind of certainty installed itself. I didn't feel righteous or wounded. Whatever came next would be handled without performance, because I'm done mistaking noise for progress. She took one more breath, the kind people take when they're about to read into a microphone, and lifted the first page a quarter inch. I met her eyes, kept my voice level, and said nothing at all. She lifted the first page and began reading like she was opening statements in a small courtroom we both lived in. We've grown apart. I feel like I don't recognize myself in this marriage. I need to live more intentionally, to find who I am outside of your routine. The cadence was smooth, the phrases pre-sanded so none would splinter in her mouth. I watched the bullet points land, one by one, like carefully placed evidence bags. She turned the page and kept going. Communication breakdowns, emotional distance, unmet needs, how the house felt heavy with expectations. I noted each borrowed term the way I would note a hairline crack. When she ran out of breath, she glanced up to see if I was breaking yet. I wasn't. The paper rustled. She read on. She shifted from theory to prescriptions. A trial separation. Space. Boundaries. Time to journal and do the work. Possibly counseling if I could agree to radically accept who she was becoming. That last phrase didn't belong to her. I could hear the podcast it wrote in on. I let it sit in the air without giving it oxygen. Is there someone else? I asked finally, just a question placed on the table between us like any other object in our house. Her mouth opened and closed. Why do men always jump to that? Because it's a simpler equation, I said. Yes or no? No, she answered. Too quick, then slower. No, this is about me. The way she said it told me she believed it. Belief can be sincere and still be convenient. She pressed forward, grateful to be moving again. She had a paragraph about pressure, how my predictability felt like a cage, how my questions about dinner felt like surveillance, how planning a weekend together made her feel managed. She said the word as if it had handcuffs attached. What outcome are you asking for? I asked. Today. A break, she said, scanning her notes for reassurance. A clean pause. We can keep things friendly. Friendly, I repeated. The syllables tasted like laminate, smooth, cheap, pretend wood. She mistook repetition for agreement and added details that didn't feel spontaneous. Separate bedrooms for a while, or separate places. She hadn't decided. She wanted to keep the car because her commute was longer. She wanted to keep the house routine exactly as is until she figured out her next steps. She wanted to tell friends a neutral version so nobody would think poorly of either of us. Messaging matters, she added, like a brand manager. Who helped you write this? I asked. She blinked. Nobody. It's an excellent draft, I said. Footnotes would make it airtight. Her cheeks colored. I've been thinking. That's allowed. It is. I kept my tone flat. Where would you stay during this trial? I don't know, she said. Then too quickly, I could crash with Alyssa for a few days. Alyssa, the friend with a couch and an enthusiasm for reinvention. Or you could stay with a coworker for a bit, since your office is near the highway. Your break, I said. Your logistics. She shifted to a softer register, the one that used to disarm me. I'm not trying to make you the bad guy. I can't breathe in here anymore. The window opens, I said. So does the door. A flash of irritation crossed her face. The notes didn't cover quips. She recentered and reached for the moral high ground. See, this is what I mean. You default to control, to problem solving. I'm asking to be heard. You're reading, I said. I'm hearing. Both can be true. She exhaled loudly, then moved to the part one could tell she had rehearsed hardest. I need you to be supportive of this. If you fight me on it, it will make everything worse. We can either do this kindly, with mutual respect, or we can do it the hard way. I don't want the hard way. She looked at me like she was giving me a gift. What does supportive look like in your draft? I asked. You don't question me about where I go, she said. You don't interrogate my choices. You don't cut off the things I rely on day to day. We keep the bills the same for now. We continue to share the car until I'm on my feet. We tell people we're taking time to grow. And we revisit in a month to see how we feel. You mean how you feel? I said. You already know how I feel. You wrote a speech in case it leaked. Her eyes hardened. I knew you'd twist this. I asked you what supportive meant, I said. You answered. That's useful. She pushed the papers aside, finally leaving script for improvisation. God, you're impossible. This is why I can't talk to you. You make everything clinical. I'm telling you I'm not happy. You're telling me you've prepared an orderly exit that leaves my life open while you test a different one? I said. That's not the same thing. The room tightened. She reached for her phone like it was a talisman, then decided against it. Why are you being so cold? Because warmth here would be charity, I said. And you're not asking for charity. You're asking for permission. She swallowed and tried a different angle. We could try counseling first. Do you want to? Her silence answered. Counseling was a box to check in case someone asked later whether she'd tried. The notes hadn't included a therapist's name. She regrouped with a softer plea. I want this to be peaceful. I want to respect each other. I don't want to burn everything down. Then stop lighting matches near dry paper, I said, nodding at the stack. She flinched. You're so cruel. No, I said. Precise. Her shoulders lifted, settled. The lines she had leaned on were running out. When scripts fail, people go hunting for emotion to fill the gap. She raised her voice a notch. Aren't you going to say anything real? Aren't you angry? Do you even care? Do I matter at all to you? You matter, I said. That's why I'm not dramatizing your decision. The question she'd been avoiding hovered between us, then fell out of her mouth as if she'd tripped. Why won't you fight for me? Because you're not here, I said. You're reading. That landed. She looked at the papers as if they'd betrayed her. She gathered them into a neater stack and squared the edges with both palms, like tidiness could repair meaning. Then she tried one last gambit. Tenderness. We were good once. We were, I said. Good isn't the same as durable. Something in her eyes flickered. Anger, grief, or the dawning fear that the performance she'd been promising herself wouldn't erupt into the explosion she believed she needed. She wanted heat, so the story made sense. I gave her weather reports. She reached for the final card people play when control slips. The future tense threat disguised as concern. If you stonewall me on this, it'll get ugly. Lawyers, discovery, all of it. I don't want that. Please don't make me go there. I won't make you do anything, I said. You'll do exactly what you want. The table felt smaller. The house felt smaller. She glanced at the hallway, at the bedroom beyond it, at the closet where we kept suitcases for trips we used to plan. Her next sentence trembled without tipping over. So what now? Now, I thought. We arrive at the part where your momentum expects mine. Where you point to the cliff and assume I'll back away or build a railing. Where the drama begins so you can tell yourself you chose courage under fire. Instead, I picked up my glass, drank water that had gone room temperature, and set it down without a sound. We're done with your draft? I said. If there's anything you want to add that isn't on paper, say it. She stared at me, waiting for the chase, the pleading, the negotiation she could win by withholding. When none arrived, the quiet thickened until even the AC seemed to hesitate. She lowered her eyes to the stack one last time, then lifted her chin with a reinstalled calm that didn't quite fit anymore. I need space, she said, returning to the first line like a student hoping the answer might be different the second time around. I nodded once, a simple acknowledgement. The pressure had peaked. The speech had emptied. The room stood still, holding what it knew. Her speech ended like a closing argument, measured, practiced, waiting on the jury. I'd already given my verdict in one word previously. Understood. Now came the sentence. I stood, not to debate, but to move. There's a difference. She watched me closely, braced for emotion, for a scene she could point to and say there. That's why. I kept my voice even, almost gentle. Have you packed your things yet? Or do you want help? The question landed like a dropped plate. She blinked, replaying it in her head, looking for the hook. I didn't offer one. I walked to the hall closet and slid out the small roller bag I use for 2-day business trips. Calm hands, simple motions, charger, toiletries, a week of shirts that don't wrinkle. There's a rhythm to leaving. Your body remembers, even if your heart doesn't. She hovered in the doorway, arms crossed, chin lifted, the stance of someone holding a position. You're being dramatic, she said. I folded socks and didn't answer. Silence is a lever. You pull it once and the whole room tilts. I set my wallet, keys, and passport on the dresser like I was laying out tools for a job. It was a job, mine. I've learned that men get in trouble when they argue for their value. You don't debate that. You demonstrate it by walking away from people who can't see it. She followed me into the bedroom, voice softer now, but edged. So what? You're just leaving? I zipped a side pocket. I said I understood. Understanding has consequences. That made her pause. She'd prepared for everything except being taken at face value. I opened the nightstand and pulled the spare key I keep taped under the drawer. I set it on the table by her glass of water. No speech, just a quiet message. I'm not going to be the security blanket you hide under while you rehearse doubts. I moved through the house with purpose. Laptop from the office. Backup drive. A folder with insurance cards, copies of titles, the boring, adult paperwork that stops chaos from multiplying. She trailed me room to room, switching tactics in real time. Annoyance, curiosity, dismissal, then that brittle laugh people use when their story isn't going to plan. You're overreacting. We were talking. I shook my head. You were announcing. I'm responding. At the kitchen counter, I opened a notes app and typed a short checklist. Call attorney, redirect mail, update HR, separate streaming, gym, cloud. The small stuff adds up when you're tired and second-guessing. I was clean, like the air after a storm when you can see the skyline all the way to the water. She reached for the phone in my hand. I slid it into my pocket and let that moment sit. Boundaries don't require explanations. They require enforcement. Do you want boxes? I asked. Closet, bathroom, vanity. I'll label. Her mouth opened, closed. Why would I need boxes? I nodded once. Because you gave a closing statement. I'm honoring it. The truth shifted in her eyes. She was getting exactly what she said she wanted. Space measured in square footage and days, not just ideas. I rolled the suitcase to the door and leaned it upright. She asked where I'd go. Somewhere quiet, I said. She wanted the name, the address, the details that would let her keep me in her mental inventory. I didn't give them. She pivoted to logistics, which meant the emotion had blinked first. What about the car? What about the bills? What about? I held up a hand, palm low, not a stop sign, just a speed bump. We'll handle what needs handling. I didn't step into the weeds where arguments live. I kept us on the road where decisions move forward. I sent 3 emails from my phone. One to an attorney I'd bookmarked months ago when something in me started saving receipts. One to my HR rep about a mailing address. One to the bank manager who knows me by name. No drama, just paperwork. I think that unnerved her more than anything I said. I walked back to the bedroom and opened her side of the closet. Do you want the cedar chest for your dresses? I asked. It was the same tone I'd used to ask a client where they want the drawings delivered. She stared like the rods might snap. I haven't decided anything, she said finally. I nodded. You wrote it like you had. The words brought heat to her cheeks. Scripts don't always survive contact with reality. I took my wedding band off and placed it in the small porcelain dish we keep by the sink for loose screws and earbuds. There was no sound in that moment, only the weight of metal on ceramic, a soft click that echoed louder than shouting. She flinched. That's not final, she said quickly. Neither is kindness, I answered. But we notice when it leaves. My phone vibrated with a reply from the attorney's assistant. Consultation times. I picked one. I wasn't promising divorce. I was promising I wouldn't sit still while someone rehearsed my ending. She moved closer, lowering her voice the way people do when they want to pull you back into an old pattern. Can we just slow down? I met her eyes. We were slow for months. We're clear now. I took a final loop through the house the way you do before catching a flight. Plugs, lights, the window she always leaves cracked for the plant she's proud of and forgets to water. I poured it a glass. Not symbolism. Just me being me. Leaving doesn't require abandoning your character. I set the watering can back under the sink and felt steady in a way I hadn't felt since the first time she called our normal life a trap. At the door, I kept my hand off the handle and looked at her one last time as a husband standing in his own hallway. I can pack my things. It's not difficult, I said, and I meant both halves of that sentence, the practical motion and the emotional truth behind it. She swallowed, the practiced certainty slipping. So that's it. You just walk? I shook my head. No, I accept. Acceptance can sound like stone. In my mouth it sounded like peace. I left the suitcase where it was and went to sleep on the couch, not out of exile, but because it's easier to leave from a room that doesn't hold memories. I folded a blanket, propped a pillow, and set an alarm I knew I wouldn't need. It was a man choosing clarity over comfort. When the house settled around midnight, I heard her open a drawer, close it, open the closet, stop. The sound of someone discovering that when you prepare an ending for someone else, sometimes you arrive at your own. I packed with the same steadiness I bring to Monday mornings. Shirts folded in thirds, cables coiled, passport slid into the inner sleeve of the duffel. No rush, just quiet efficiency. She hovered in the doorway with that sing-song voice people use when they're trying to butter bread that's already stale. First came the soft touch on my shoulder, then the lashes, then the careful apology about miscommunication. I zipped the duffel and kept working. The performance didn't land because the audience was gone. Whatever kept me hooked before, the hope, the habit, the good memories, had burned off like fog under noon sun. The closet sounded different with every empty hanger I slid along the rail, like the house was learning a new echo that didn't include me. When the soft tactics didn't land, the question started. Where would I be staying? For how long? Did we have to go nuclear this fast? I answered none of it. I was simply done participating in a system that ran on my fuel and her brakes. She pivoted to logistics I used to jump at, the dog's vet appointment, the HOA email, the small leak under the sink. I nodded once at each item and kept laying down boundaries with my silence. When I carried the first bag to the door, she followed close enough to crowd my shoulder, trying to read my face like a map back to familiar terrain. Then came the flip, the blame. I was dramatic. I was abandoning our marriage. I was throwing everything away over a tone. I slid my laptop into its sleeve and finally looked at her. Calm, flat, like a medic dressing a wound he knows will scar. That's when the seduction attempt arrived, rehearsed but shaky at the edges. She reached for my belt with the same hands that had pushed me away 100 times this year. I stepped back and set the laptop on the console. No anger. Just a clean refusal that told the truth. I set my keys on the table, peeled off the garage fob, and left the house key where she could see it. She made one last grab at control. Who gets the master, the dishes, the accounts? And I gave her the only sentence she needed. Over the next week, I'll prepare all the documents so you don't have to worry about finding yourself. All the bills for the house and the car, yes, the one leased in my name, will be transferred to you. Her mouth opened like she wanted to argue grammar. What she heard, though, was the subtext. I wouldn't be financing her new life while she auditioned it. I carried the duffel down the hall. She followed, questions swelling again. Did I really mean it? Was this revenge? Would I come back tonight after I'd cooled off? I didn't answer. I set the bag down, pulled on my jacket, and, for the first time in months, let my eyes sweep the rooms without calculation. The framed photos. The grocery list on the fridge. The small scuff on the baseboard I kept meaning to fix. You learn something in that kind of inventory. How much of a home is maintenance? How much is memory? And how little either matters when respect leaves the property. The door closed behind me with a plain sound that meant more than any speech. In the car, my phone pulsed like a trapped bird. I put it face down on the seat and drove. 10 minutes later, I checked into a short-term place with clean lines and thicker silence. I turned on the desk lamp, opened my laptop, and did what I said I would do. Utilities, transfer initiated. Auto payments, canceled, with written notice and timestamps. Insurance, Gym, streaming, all the small invisible wires that made her life seamless, severed or reassigned. No pettiness, everything documented, everything above board. I emailed her a single PDF listing what would remain, what would move, and what would be terminated on specific dates. By morning, the chorus arrived. A long text from her best friend about how love is messy but worth fighting for, which meant don't change the terms while she figures out alternatives. Around noon, she escalated to panic. Screenshots of balances I had already explained. Questions dressed as accusations. Offers of counseling if I came home tonight. I typed exactly one reply. You asked for space. I'm respecting it completely. Mute. Distance with a clean edge. When you starve a game of attention, the rules fall apart on their own. By evening, the practical consequences reached her door. The internet flickered off and stayed off until she called to put it in her name. The auto insurance app told her she was an adult with a car and adult responsibilities. The electric bill appeared in her inbox instead of mine. That was the point, not to punish, but to match reality to the story she wanted to live. Independence sounds romantic until it includes Tuesday. The next day, my landlord from years back, old school, no nonsense, texted to say he'd heard I was looking for a longer lease. We met, shook hands, and lined up a place that didn't carry our history in the walls. I updated my mailing address and emergency contacts, removed her from every default and fallback. I called my attorney and booked a consultation to formalize the boundary I'd already put in place. Meanwhile, mutual friends began reaching out, the quiet ones, the observers. They weren't picking sides. They were confirming what they'd suspected, that my calm wasn't an act, it was a line. On the third night, she showed up outside the new building, tearful and breathless, trying to stage the reconciliation scene she thought I craved. I met her in the lobby. Concrete floors, steel mailboxes, a plant that needed watering. She asked where we went from here. I told her the only path I was willing to walk. Forward, separately, with respect and paperwork. She said I was cold. I said I was clear. She asked if she could call tomorrow. I said she could email. When the elevator doors closed, I felt a strange mix of grief and relief, the kind that shows up when you finally stop pushing the boulder that never moves. Back upstairs, the lamp threw its quiet circle over my desk. I finished the last transfer form and attached it to the growing folder with her name on it. Then I slid my phone across the table, turned it face down, and let the room be simple. Her game ended because I refused to play. The week that followed felt like a long exhale I didn't know I'd been holding. Mornings were quiet, measured, coffee in a clean mug, a short drive to the job site, the steady comfort of numbers that add up. Evenings were paperwork and small decisions, the kind you don't notice when a house is humming, but that define whether it keeps humming at all. I kept my promise. Utilities transferred with timestamps, insurance updated, streaming and subscriptions pruned to zero on my side. I sent her a simple packet. What was moved, what would terminate, and when. No commentary or arrows, just facts. If she wanted space, she had it in the only form that counts, responsibility. She tried to pull me back into the old rhythm with paragraphs that pretended to be questions. Could we talk? Could we hit pause on the transfers? Wasn't this too much, too fast? I kept a single lane open. Email, weekday business hours, logistics only. When she sent emotion, I didn't punish it. The difference between cruelty and clarity is whether you add weight. My attorney and I met on a Wednesday that didn't require much from the sun. We spoke like two men measuring a beam, calm and exact. I told him I wasn't interested in dragging anyone through court. I wanted clean lines, documented terms, and an exit that left both of us able to sleep. He nodded, circled a few items, and drafted what needed drafting. The first time I saw irretrievable breakdown in black and white, I waited for the ache. It didn't arrive because the ache had done its work already. Respect dies quietly long before lawyers learn its name. Mutual friends began sending careful feelers. They weren't asking for gossip. They were gauging whether they needed to pick sides. I made it easy. I told them we were separating, that we'd handle it like adults, that I didn't need anyone to carry water for me. The story that lives best is the shortest one that's true. A few of them thanked me for not trying to draft them into a war. One sent a proud of you. I didn't know I needed until I read it. In my new place, I built small rituals that had nothing to prove. I ran the trail by the river before sunrise and let my breathing decide the route. I assembled a cheap table and made it sturdy. I set my phone face down during dinner and didn't reach for it when it lit up. I changed my emergency contact from her to my brother, then to a close friend who shows up without speeches. I booked a physical and replaced the wipers on my truck. None of it looked like rebuilding to anyone else. To me, it was a blueprint written at human scale. Systems that work, maintenance you can trust, quiet as a feature, not a flaw. She swung between tones in her messages as the real costs found their way home. The car lease in her name meant insurance in her name, which meant rates she'd never seen. The house payment arrived without my autopay behind it. Independence read differently when it showed up as due dates. She asked if we could reset the conversation, then floated counseling again, then suggested we take a month and revisit. I gave the same answer every time because men make their lives complicated when they treat a boundary like a topic. We met twice more in person, both times at the mediator's office. She sat straight-backed, palms pressed to her thighs like a student waiting to be called on. I kept to the line I'd already drawn. You keep the house and the car you asked to keep. We divide the rest by function, not sentiment. We close joint accounts. We walk out with the ability to pay our own bills and look our own friends in the eye. She called that cold. I called it adult. The mediator called it progress. Her circle reacted in predictable waves. One friend wrote me a paragraph about holding space that sounded like a copy and paste from the same podcast that wrote her speech. Another sent a 2-sentence check-in that felt like a man asking a question he hoped he'd never have to ask. Are you okay? I said yes. He said good. That was the best conversation I had that month. On signing day, I arrived 5 minutes early and stared at the potted plant by the reception desk. It was thriving. Someone had been watering it on schedule with the right amount of light. Simple things grow when care is real and consistent. We reviewed the agreement line by line. No traps. Just the math of two adults stepping apart. When it was her turn to sign, her hand shook for the first time since this started. She looked at me like maybe I'd rescue us from her own decision. I didn't. She signed. I signed. We stood, and the room didn't spin. What I felt afterward was relief. The clean kind you get when a machine finally stops rattling because you remove the part that never fit. I drove to the river, walked until the trail thinned, and sat on a cracked bench that had seen better paint. I thought about the years that were good, because they were, and I let them be exactly that without using them as an argument to keep what wasn't. Love deserved more respect than being quoted out of context. In the weeks that followed, her messages tapered from monologues to sentences to silence. The last one was small, almost careful. I didn't understand you. I let it sit there on the screen for a full minute. Maybe she was right. Maybe I hadn't insisted on being understood loud enough when it could have mattered. Or maybe she understood just fine and didn't like where the truth led. I typed one word, the only one I've given her that never needed a follow-up, and hit send. Understood. I won't pretend there aren't quiet rooms. There are. You hear the refrigerator more. You notice the way a door latch sounds at 11 p.m. You catch yourself reaching for an extra plate. But I'd rather live with rooms that echo than fill them with a performance. Peace is louder than I expected once you stop apologizing for it. People ask if I'd take her back. It's the wrong question. It assumes the door is still the same door. It isn't. It closed the night she read a speech at our dining table, and I answered with a sentence that made both of us adults. Not cruel, just done. If respect ever returned to that threshold, it would arrive with humility and plain words, and I don't spend my life waiting for visitors who might never knock. I don't try to win anymore. That was the trap, thinking love is a contest with judges and a prize. I refuse to lose myself. That's the only standard that travels with me from one address to the next. I get up early. I do the work I'm good at. I keep promises that fit in one hand. I water plants on schedule. When someone asks me how I'm doing, I say steady, because it's true. She'll write her story about all of this. People do. They need a version that lets them sleep. Mine is simple. I was married to a woman who prepared a speech to end our life, and I gave her one honest answer. She didn't understand it until she saw the door close behind me. Respect isn't negotiated. It's enforced, quietly, finally, by the way you walk away and don't come back.
Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.